You know, one of the things I was talking to Andy about too that that's I think is helpful in the idea of correction and how you work that out in your marriage is the community around you, people around you. Several years ago, Jill and I we have every month we meet with our elders and wives in a care group where we just talk about life and we hang out together, have dinner and enjoy fellowship and care for each other. And several years ago, we were in a meeting, and Jill was sharing some stories about family and different things. And unbeknownst to me, I was interjecting a lot, you know, kind of saying comments, and she made comments. And the following day after our care group, Mike Keller, who's, I think, Mark's our resident Barnabas, Mike called and he said, "Hey, man, what a great meeting last night." I said, "Yeah, it was so much fun." He said, "Did you have a good time?" I said, "I had a great time." He said, "Can I run something by you?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Would you do me a favor? Would you check with Jilly and just ask her if you interrupted her a lot last night?" And I said, "Yeah, did I interrupt her?" And he said, "Yeah, you know, bud, he said she was giving stories and you just ran over the top of her stories." And he said, "I'm concerned that you were just dishonoring your wife unintentionally. And I would just ask you to check in with her because I don't want her to ever feel that way, especially in our group." And so I get off the phone with with Mike, and I go into Jill and I just said, "Hey, it was Mike just called and Mike thought I was like interrupting you last night, you know?" I mean, you know, weird, you know? And she just said, "Oh, I thank God for Mike." And I said, "Well, really?" She said, "Oh my word, every time I gave a story, you just had to finish my lines. You had to tell everybody, you had to elaborate because the story wasn't good enough." And I was like, "Babe, I am so sorry. I know that looked dishonoring, and I just don't want to be that way." And what you notice, I want you to notice something. Notice how relational it was from Mike. Notice how it was, "I could be wrong. Would you check with your wife?" Notice how open-handed it was. It wasn't a fist like you. It was, "Hey, bro, I love you, man. I love your wife, and I just would never want her to feel this way." And what it did for her, which was I think it was unintended consequence or unintended blessing for Mike, was it made her trust the men around her and around me that they would speak the truth to me. Amen. Now, let me put that on another side. Andy mentioned something that's really important that doesn't get talked about a whole lot. Men can take that from one another. We take it decently well many times. But when women are confronted, their hackles get up. And my wife, this is a quote from my wife, so I'll use her, this isn't just for, so, you know, she's the authority in the room on this issue. She says, "One of the areas that does not get covered enough is the pride in women who do not like to receive correction. And they don't like to receive it from men." And she said, "That's pride." And it's very true. So as Andy said it very well, if we want our husbands to receive correction well, and we want our wives to receive correction well, then we need to be recipients of correction well as well, right? And by the grace of God, we can in that. But what a joy it is to be in a community like that where you can have friends that will call and just graciously, humbly, relatively believing the best about you. "I could be wrong. This is what I saw." Right? And I could give you multiple examples of that from my own life where brothers have called and said, "Hey man, I just observed something, the way that you interacted with one of your kids or your wife. Would you just check with them and just see if this was something that affected them?" So that's important as well, right? It's not just the husband and wife team. It's also in community together, doing this stuff out together, right? And learning how to trust one another enough that, you know, when they speak into my life, I can receive it and I can take it back to my spouse and say, "This is what somebody observed. Do you see this as well?" And it creates in them a real trust that God is at work, right? And that's a genuine blessing, right? So just drop that into your lap as you're thinking about this part as well. Okay, Andy, you're up.
Those are three great words in correction. I could be wrong. Let's do forwards. I could be wrong, but it's always a great way to bring it. I could be wrong, might be missing something. Give the person the ability to explain what they're thinking. It could be they have an explanation. But generally, I think, bring something faithfully and leave it to the Lord. We're going to talk about constructive disagreement and then deconstructive disagreement, which is conflict. So we've been talking about some very doable upkeep of our marriages. Everything we've talked about so far is just in the realm of upkeep in our marriages. Today we're going to look at things, now we're going to turn attention a little bit to things when things aren't necessarily in sync. And we're going to talk about marriage disagreement. You have a car and a warning. I have a car, and the warning light keeps coming on, and it's a warning light about the system that tracks your tire pressure in your car. And all, you know, my car's like 14 years old, so it's not like modern, but it has a system. And so it comes on, and so I've taken it in, and you know they've checked it out, and they've reset it, and then but you know it keeps coming on. So one of the dilemmas is, what do I do with that warning light? Like, what do I do with that? Do I just start ignoring it? What do I do? And so I've been trying to figure this out. But there's a danger when we see a warning light in our car. What do we do? Do we just simply ignore the problem? You know, do we say, oh, that's a really nice sort of different color on my dashboard. I kind of like that color. That red really sets off the blue on this part over here. We could do that. Do we just try to stop the warning lights? Do we go down and look for the fuse and we just say, let's pull that, problem solved. No more warning lights. Or do I work on getting it back to the way it should be? Do I actually solve the problem? Do I deal with the issue? That can happen in marriage. It's funny with this situation with my tires. I was kind of obsessing on it. What do I do? This warning light. And it came to me, well, you know, in the very worst case, I could go back to doing it in the way they did it in the last century, where you just occasionally check your tire pressure. Like, why do I freak out over the tire pressure issue when for generations they just put a gauge on and check the tires every once in a while? So I may have to go back and go old school on that because they may be able to fix it. But what about our marriage? What do we happen when we see warning lights? When we see things that aren't necessarily what they should be? Disagreement may or may not be an important warning light. And it's something I think we should have a category for in our marriages, that sometimes we simply disagree. What does it mean when we disagree? Is it important that we always agree? In some marriages, there's a sense that for us to be in unity, we have to be in agreement on everything. And when that happens, typically conflict erupts because one person is trying to get the other person to their side. Now, Jill and I generally over the course of life have been in agreement on most things. I didn't have to bring her into something. We sitting under the same preaching of God's word, being in fellowship with the people, you tend to live in a great deal of agreement. Parenting can be something of a challenge. We've had disagreements over parenting and what should we do about a situation. But most people who are dealing with parenting disagreements, they feel like they're in a foxhole anyway. And the idea that I'm going to ultimately, there's two of us in the foxhole, and we basically still have the enemy coming at us. We have to agree on some plan of action. You tend to break down the disagreements. During the COVID season, in 2008, and the politics and all that stuff, was a time where Jill and I had some disagreements, not radical disagreements, but just viewing things in a different way, trusting some sources differently, looking at all the information that was coming, whether it was politics or COVID or whatever it was. And we found ourselves not in agreement on things and having to have conversations about how to move forward when we aren't necessarily in agreement. And I felt like this is not a case where I, as the husband, say, and this is how we're going to think about this. Because frankly, I didn't know enough to be able to make that call. If I know enough about your pastors, my guess is the way they handled that situation was with a recognition that we don't know, we're not experts on any of this. Social justice, we're not experts on medicine, we're not experts on none of that stuff we expert on, so we have to try to be as faithful as we can be. And what we didn't want to do as pastors in our church was weigh over somebody's conscience. Well, this is how you must think about this. The church calls you to think this way. That's stepping into somebody's conscience on an area where, in my perspective, it isn't the church's role to dictate somebody's conscience on these issues. And in my marriage, I felt like I couldn't do that. I couldn't tell my wife, for the sake of unity, you need to think like this. So we had to learn how to have meaningful conversations over something we disagreed on. And as a result, it actually produced a lot of good fruit in our marriage because it allowed us to have conversations that where we could learn from one another, where we could benefit from the other person's perspective, and where she was trying to learn. And I found a lot of times we were, we were right on the edge of conflict because I was feeling like, okay, you're not really hearing me, and she's feeling I'm not. Because the way we think about it, folks, is if you're really hearing me, that's how we roll, really, right? If you're not agreeing with me, it means I need to say it again. And say it slower and say it louder.
Stop it.
Yeah. And I need to be careful because obviously I need to bring you up to my level of understanding. Because I clearly see this. And you know what I also need to do? I need to show you all my facts and data to overwhelm you. Okay, so you're So and frankly, it isn't just guys who do this, right? We're all experts on things and we try to convince the other person we are. So here's some things. I want to offer you this category of disagreement because disagreement is a wisdom pursuit. So you can have fellowship and say, you know what, we're having a situation in our house where we're just disagreeing. Let's say it's over parenting. We're disagreeing about how to handle this issue with one of our kids. How can we get help? So that the input of somebody can speak into the disagreement, maybe bring order. Learn how to find wisdom when you don't necessarily agree on everything situationally. So disagreement is not necessarily conflict. It may feel like a lack of unity, but I think you can be unified biblically while there's disagreement. Paul and Peter had disagreement that did not affect their unity. Every New Testament letter speaks to some kind of disagreement in the church. And the appeal is consistently for unity without resolving the disagreements. So it's not necessarily conflict. Debate, talking about issues from different perspectives, laying out what I think is not necessarily arguing. You should be able to debate in your home over issues. You should be able to listen to the other person's perspective and give it the attention it's due because this person you've married matters to you, and they should be able to hear you, and you should be able, for example, to say back to that person what their point in a way that says you get it. That's one of the key things in having a meaningful debate among relationships. If you bring to me and you're saying this, and I should be able to say, okay, here's what I hear you saying. Is that correct? Yeah, I think you get it. So if you're going to debate, this will help you in a lot of places. Don't debate what you think the other person's saying. Debate what they're actually saying. And the only way you'll know that is if they say, you understand what I'm saying. Every marriage will have disagreement. The issue is how we deal with it. We come into our marriage with ways of dealing with disagreement that are hard to change. And so we grow up in households and situations where families have different approaches. Maybe you had a family, you guys talking about it with, yeah, with, one family where we just don't disagree. We just leave the room. We just don't talk about anything relevant. Another family that seems like they're always disagreeing. There, Jill and I come from a bit. Their family was a very verbal family, and so and in her family, my opinion matters, even if you don't want it. Right? So that's how it functions. So everybody's got opinions and they're boom, 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 boom. And so I came into it because my family is like, okay, we don't talk. We watch television. We had two things that kept us going as a family. One is a family dog and the other is TV. That's the only thing that kept us together. And we survived. But my family doesn't handle conflict. It doesn't talk about deep issues. It was kind of like just whatever. And so I came into a marriage where we had different approaches. She wanted to talk things through. I'm like, it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't think it's broke. And so you have to learn. You come in with ways of dealing with things from your past. Maybe if you came in from bad relationships, you're bringing that baggage in too. So we don't come in, whatever we think is the way to handle disagreement is probably just our perspective, not necessarily the best way. So let's start with the idea that nobody comes into a marriage with the way to deal with it. We need God's word to help us deal with conflict and disagreement. Here's another thing: if you're going to be having healthy disagreement, you must have a real clear understanding and be able to discern the difference between temptation and sin in the other person. You get involved in something you disagree on, their tone may change. They may feel like they may feel like they're struggling. Don't presume that's sin. The Bible has a category for temptation that's not sin, for the battle with temptation. I think in marriages, we need to be able to understand that my spouse's struggle with temptation is something that is an evidence of grace. The fact that they're battling, if you watch them and they're biting their lip, you watch them and you can see they're doing all kinds of things because they're wanting to talk and they're trying not to talk, and he's got a lot of things there to say, and or they're turning their back and they're trying to listen, but they're okay, that's not sin necessarily. Now, it may ultimately get to sin, but we should recognize, we've learned that when we're having a difficult conversation, that we're going to do things that don't feel to the other person like they're that helpful. But a lot of times it's the battle. I'm trying to battle to not say something that wants to come out. I'm trying to battle to let you speak and not interrupt you. I'm trying to battle to make sure that what I say graciously. That's a win, folks. That's a win. Now, you may wish they would speak to you and relate to you like, oh, your words are like honey dripping down on them. But that's not going to happen in disagreement. There's going to be strife. There's going to be struggle to not sin. But let's celebrate when we fight temptation, but we don't give in to sin. Let's celebrate that. Honey, this was a great conversation. We had numerous times over the course of the pandemic years, numerous times we get to the end of it, and one of us would be able to say to honey, I really feel like I could feel that you were wanting to disagree with me. I could feel that you had things you wanted to bring in, but you listened and you asked questions. You didn't make comments. I felt like I saw you fighting sin right in front of me, and I thought that was wonderful. I felt your godliness in your battle with sin, with temptation. There are times we sinned. We had to confess it. We'll talk about that tonight. But let's have a category for temptation and not treat everything like, because I don't like the way you're responding, that is sin. People can feel oppressed if they feel like anything they do that doesn't fit your standard of righteousness is sin. When in fact, a lot of times they're doing a great job appropriating the grace of God, to speak and respond back in a godly way. So keep that in mind. And God always uses disagreement for his good purpose. He's used that in our life. Just the fact that we're married 39 years and we can have a disagreement means we are two people who are operating with active consciences before the Lord and are not so concerned about having, a superficial unity in our marriage that we aren't willing to have hard conversations. God is using that for good purpose. So, but, this is the but, sometimes disagreement can become conflict. And there's a reason why I talk about disagreement separately, because you can disagree and never have conflict. What is conflict? And we're going to look at that through James 4. Again, if I know your pastors, this is a familiar passage. This is James turning and dealing with the roots of conflict. And James 4, beginning in verse 1, he says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that the other person lacks the necessary information they need in order to have agreement with you?" I don't think that's it. That's not what it says. Okay. Oh, it says this, that your passions are at war within you. You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your own passions. You adulterous people. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. And that all holds together around this idea of whose agenda do you bring into your relationship? Is it your agenda or is it God's agenda? And another person and what they think and do and say will reveal what your agenda is. So with some insights from this text on conflict. Conflict is rarely about the issues we disagree on, believe it or not. Problems are generally not in the realm of lack of knowledge or information or even of opinions. We disagree. It is one of the craziest things I see in the Christian world these days, where people are in such disagreement. There is so much conflict, and it's all about, well, this is the issue. This is the facts. This is the truth. If you're in conflict, it's never about facts. You'll know this because let's say you have a conflict about a situation. It could be a political situation. It can be a parenting situation. It can be a situation in your marriage. And you get to the end of that and you find you've just exhausted it out and you've had to agree to disagree. Okay, we're just going to think differently about this one. And then the other person finds that what their position was actually accurate without refute, that you can't refute it. Well, actually, I was right. And they come back to you and they say, you know what, about that thing that we agreed to disagree on, actually, this proves that you were wrong. That's never a blessing. You'll never hear the other person say, wow, now I get it. Now I understand why I just lacked the information that I needed to totally agree with you. You have set me free. That like never happens. No, we just jump arguments. Well, okay, that might be true, but here's the thing. Because it's not about information. And couples who spend time trying to convince the other person, they'll do it by, okay, well, you obviously lack the information, so I'm going to give you all this information. Or they get obsessed on sequences. No, well, actually, this happened. You say it happened like this, but actually this happened before. And if you really understand the sequence of things, you recognize it couldn't have happened like you happened because it only happened like I thought it would happen. We do that, and we argue over timing. Well, actually, it was 15 minutes you did that. It wasn't It wasn't 5 minutes, it was 15. No, actually, I went back and I timed it. Here on my phone, watch this. Okay, I timed it. I timed it. You see this? This is how long you talked. Right? You act like that's going to solve the problem. No. Why? Because the problem is not out there. The problem is in here. This is the danger of going to counseling that is therapeutically driven. Not that you can't benefit, but with therapeutic counseling, it's all out there. Your problem is out there. It's not in here. James locates the problem in the heart. Why do you have quarrels and fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? So if you are in conflict even today, there'll be a lot of futility in a nice beach location if you don't recognize that the primary problem doesn't mean that I'm the only one sinning. It just means that the problem cannot be resolved if I don't look at why I'm fighting in the first place, what I'm after. Conflict is a result of our entrenched desires being elevated to demands. We want something and we don't get it. There may be nothing wrong with what we want, but because we don't get it, we elevate it into a demand. This opposes the primary relational emphasis in marriage, which is not having desires met, but ministry to another person. So in marriage, when my desires are the thing that need to be satisfied for this to work, I'm actually working against the very point of marriage in the first place, which is God putting me into a covenant relationship so that I can be a blessing to another person. It's not desires driven. That's why you can't watch a Hallmark movie and build your marriage from that. Because that's all about desires. You fill my life with the thing that was missing to make me a whole person. Yeah, for about 6 months. And then I start asking you to fill my life with all I need to be a whole person. We can't do that. What irritates us about our spouse, what tends to provoke us in our spouse, is usually the way they get in the way of what we want. Spouses get in the way of what we want. And because they live with us, that happens on a regular basis. We have different desires. So some common desires that get elevated to demands, this is not an exhaustive list, but I've found in my own life, in our lives, and in the people I counsel, there's some sort of dominant idolatry themes. I'm not going to do a lot with idolatry, but this can be helpful. And so what I want you to do is just listen to these and think about which one might be a desire that can become a demand for you. All of these have an appropriate place in your life. All of them can be experienced in a non-sinful way. So, for example, comfort or pleasure can be an idolatry. It can feel like I need ease, I need peace. I love a lack of responsibility. I love leisure. That's mine. If you talk about me, it's comfort. I am comfort driven in my natural state. I've known, I'll give you an illustration from yesterday, right? We were leaving our hotel and it was raining and I had packed the car. I didn't even tell Joe this because I was so embarrassed, but so you're hearing about it now. So I realized by the grace of God that my earbuds, is that what they're called? The little white thing, and with the earbuds in them. I had been on the phone talking to somebody, and I thought, did I put them back in my bag? And I looked in my bag, and they weren't there. And I thought, oh, I must have left them up in the room. And I literally had this thought: is it really worth going back into the room to look for them? Okay, what do they cost? Who knows what they cost? How much? like 200 something, right? It crossed my mind. It might be worth it to spend $200 to not have to go up 40 feet to that room to look for him. That, my friends, is the way comfort idols drive you. I'm willing to pay $200 to not have to go up there and find them.
I would have done that.
You would have, well, yeah, the problem is I probably wouldn't have told you. And this would be a conflict on the way home. So that's the way it rolls in our home. But yeah, and I have a whole teaching on, I have a whole life devoted to explaining comfort idols. But that may be one for you. Another one is control or independence. Control functions two ways. Control can be, I need to control something, or it can be, I need to not be controlled by something. Same idol, just expressed two different ways. Now we're getting into areas where my wife might have challenges. That's right, yeah. Order, control, can be power. I get power in my life from controlling things. My agenda is very important to me. I've got to be doing this. This has had to happen. This happened. And so what you can tell is, when it gets out of hand is when somebody interrupts or makes it difficult for you to control something. You're going to see that inflamed to a demand, and that becomes a passion that can drive conflict. The third one, the esteem of others is a powerful one. What do people think of me? That can really affect marriages. I've seen marriages where people will not have people over at their house because of the way they want to be perceived. And so there's a lot of ways that the esteem of others can drive us. The fear of man. And one way it can drive us is I have a need to be understood. You need to understand me. That's the esteem of others. If I need to know that you understand me, therefore that means I need to know that you agree or at least affirm what I think. We live in a culture right now where it's not just about toleration, folks. It's about affirmation. It's about you must agree with me. And why? But it's all out there. I have no identity unless it's validated by other people. That's the fear of man. Another one is rights. I'm very hung up on rights. So in a situation that's happening, I'm okay being wrong, but I need to know who's wrong. I need to know who's right. I don't like it when there's no legal decision on this issue. And you fight for rights. You need vindication. You can't let something go. You need to be proven right. You need to prove yourself right. And it's very important for you that you know where blame goes. I'm not going to be blamed for this. That's on you. And you negotiate your life based on not being blamed for things. Rights can be an idol. And then possessions can be an idol. My stuff. What I value in this world. I clearly don't have a possessions idolatry because I was willing to spend $200 to avoid going up to get something. So one great thing, and this may be more for you, not necessarily an immediate conversation, this could create conflict, but where do you tend to fight? What things drive you to fight? Not everything's going to drive you to fight. But something will, and then you'll find yourself in the James 4 dilemma. The James 4 dilemma says this: if you fight for your passions, you cannot justify it as righteous before God. You adulterous people. If we do this, we lose our ability to stand. I can't get into a conflict defending my rights, defending my comfort, defending my control, defending my perspective, defending my reputation, and think I'm on God's side. To do all that, we abandon God's side. Even when we say, but Lord, you know, show me, show them I'm right. James says, you ask, but you ask for the wrong thing and you don't get it because you ask to fulfill your own desires. So you see what James is doing is he's cutting off our escape routes. And he's making sure we understand that if we are in conflict, we are people who need to deal with in our hearts. We have issues with our hearts. We'll talk about this a little bit tonight. It always takes two people to have a conflict. Jesus Christ pointed the way to be righteous with people who opposed him, even to the point of the cross. Nothing anybody ever does requires us to respond in conflict. When I'm dealing with a married couple, I might see 80% of the problem in one spouse, but I'm never going to see 100%, unless it's an abusive situation, which is not what this retreat is about. I'm not covering abuse or oppression. I'm talking about generally healthy marriages with two believers who are able to follow Christ without the oppression of one of them. There will be something coming from both sides. And so you can always own. This is why I'm fighting. Why I'm in this fight is for this. I want this, I want this, I want this, and I'm not getting it. So the more we can identify that, the more we can respond and do what we'll talk about tonight, which is deal with the conflict. But let's talk about, and this is where I'm going to end you today. This is a great exercise, not necessarily do on a nice sunny day at the beach. But it's a good exercise to go through. Jill and I have gone through this. And look at your tactics for fighting. Because we always do things that fit how we want to win a conflict. And if you can start to see how in marriage your conflicts pattern around certain tactics, you'll start to recognize why you're not getting anywhere in the conflict. Even people who really take James 4:1-3 to heart, sometimes they don't see that they have patterns that they do in conflict that make it difficult to know how to resolve them. So there's some questions I have for you in here, and I want to walk through them quickly. But I think what we've gotten a handle on is that we tend to do certain things, and if we can work on not doing those, then we can get to the hard issues quicker and resolve the conflict issue quicker. So, for example, some things that you can do in your conflict that will not be helpful. And what I typically encourage folks, we do this in premarital counseling, where we just say, pick, on a scale of 1 to 5, look and see, are there, 1 being, no, this is not an issue for us or for me. 5 being, yeah, this is kind of, this is the light going off in my car. Which of these tends to reflect how we do conflict? You'll find in conflict it's very patterned. We do the same thing pretty much every time. Doesn't matter the issue, doesn't matter the situation. We tend to handle things certain ways. So here's some, and just to throw them out to you. In conflict, do I interrupt the other person? Is that a 1, a 2, a 3, or 4, or a 5? Am I regularly interrupting? Are we comfortable interrupting in our conflict? If somebody were watching our conflict, would they say, "Well, nobody ever finishes a sentence in this conflict"? Do I interrupt? Do I bring up past failure in present situations? If I do that, I'm throwing gasoline on it. But we do that. We gunny sack. We bring things from the past into the present. Do I use emotions to get my way? Now, this can affect... It's a guy thing. To be honest with you, it is a guy thing too. But it's often women, this is where they struggle. And they say, well, I got to be able to express my emotions. Yes, there's a difference between expressing your emotions and manipulating with emotion. You'll know the difference when you can be in you can be in a distraught emotional state and then go and shop at Giant or the supermarket. Ladies in particular, guys too. Guys will do it in different ways. But the idea that I can bring emotions into play to get my way is something you have to ask yourself. Do I do this? Do I do this? Do I exaggerate or use universal language? You always. You never. Right? That ain't smart. First of all, it's not accurate. Second of all a person has to do is say, well, you say I never do this. I did it one time. Back in 2008, I did it. So you can tell your whole argument's just gone now. Nothing you say matters anymore because I showed you the exception. So it's a dumb tactic, but people do it. But it's also judgmental. When a person feels like they have a you always or you never fall on them, they feel like, what can I do? Yeah. What can I do? Do you label? Well, that's just like your mother. That's a big one. Okay, I think I can do this. We'll find out. But Jill's mom and my dad are great caricatures of how we don't want to be, right? They're in some ways. They're loving people. Her mom, she's passed away this past summer. Wonderful woman. My dad, huge, big heart. But they were both quirky people. They just both did things that they sort of dominated rooms in different ways, right? And so we have given each other permission to some extent. So she'll just say, oh, that's a Jakey thing you just did there. And it's my dad's name is Jake. And then I'll say, well, that sounds like, that's Lois. That's Lois, So we have a certain latitude, but I suggest you have to have a pretty highly developed perspective about your parents to be able to do that. For most people to label people or that's passive aggressive, using psychological terms on somebody else, I feel like that's narcissistic, never helpful. They're vague. They're vague terms that get filled with meaning. They're called social constructs. Most of these terms are called social constructs. That means they are terms that then get filled with meaning by whoever uses them. So when we can't use them as labels because they're very unhelpful in a marriage conflict. Do I hit below the belt by using your vulnerability against you? I know things about you that other people don't know. I know things that we've kept inside our home. If I start putting those in play in conflict, I do a lot of damage. Do I psychoanalyze you? Tell you what your motivations are? Well, the reason you're doing that, the reason you're saying that is this. We don't know. We don't know. We can't psychoanalyze, but people do that. They think they understand the motivations. Do I tend to look for blame to justify myself? Do I try to make everything a moral issue? Well, you're wrong, and that means I'm right. Do I tend to be defensive or deflect responsibility? Well, no, that you don't understand. That's not, no, it wasn't me. It was this happened over here, and I just was responding. That's the classic thing we do. Well, it isn't what I meant to say. I just said it because of this and this and this and this and this. I'm just deflecting responsibility. I said something, I shouldn't have said it. I should own it. I shouldn't be looking for reasons to convince you why I really didn't mean it. Don't get caught up in, well, I didn't mean what I said. No, own what you said. Because out of the heart, the mouth speaks. Do I argue just to get my way? Sometimes this is what I do. I just come home and I've been in an elders meeting for 8 hours and I've lost every debate. I'm ornery. I'm just like, I'm looking for a fight. And so I'll do something and I'll realize, okay, I am setting myself up for a miserable night. I don't care. I'm just going for it. And, it never works. But sometimes we just do that. We argue just for the sake of arguing. Do I do that? Is that something I tend to do? Because I just love debate. I just want to, no, and yeah, I do that. Do I tend to minimize my sin in light of the others? You'll hear that where say, yeah, well, yeah, okay, yeah, I know I sinned. Yep, I sinned. Yep. But you, we can talk about my sin. My sin's important. Yeah, but yours. Yeah, I know yeah, well, you did this, and of course I responded in sinful ways to what you did. Do I minimize my sin in light of what I perceive the other person's sin to be? And do I look to prosecute arguments rather than reach understanding? Do I want to do this in the courtroom? Going back to the judge. Now I'm not necessarily the judge. I'm the prosecuting attorney. I'm going to just give mountains of and I'm going to win my case. And yeah, I'm not the judge, but the judge is watching me argue and he's saying, wow, I'm convinced you're right. Wow, man, you are doing a great job. That's a great amount of evidence. Okay, I think I'm the judge of the universe. I know every heart motive. I know everything that's happening. I know the future and the past and everything about going on. I know everything that's going on in your heart. And wow, you're convincing me you're righteous. No. If we get our conflicts into the court, we may feel like we've won the argument, but the judge will throw out the case. And he'll say, you're the problem. So we need to recognize that. So what I'm doing here is giving you some practical, here are tactics that we use in conflict. Tonight we're going to talk about resolving conflict. I'm not leaving you hanging today with, okay, well now we know how we mess up. Tonight we're going to talk about how we resolve. But you need to look at your practices and your motivations for why you do conflict in the first place. Or you're not going to really get a handle on how to navigate out of conflict into, or potential conflict back into disagreement. I love a marriage where there can be disagreement with no conflict. I love a marriage where someone can express an opinion and not have the other person treat that like an attack. I love a place where somebody can say something that maybe wasn't said in the most kind and gentle way, maybe could have been said better, but it isn't treated like an attack, and now we're in it, that where the other person can cover over. A lot of this, folks, we're going to talk about forgiveness tonight. There's a very important principle in the scriptures. Colossians 3 talks about it. We have the capacity to cover over sin. We have the capacity when someone actually sins against us, when one of these idols comes into play and that comes up against us, we don't have to respond with our own sin. In fact, we can honor God by simply covering over, by simply saying, you know what, yeah, I know she's had a hard day today, and it's been hard with the kids, and she's come and she's kind of dumped on me. I can cover over this in love. That's a biblical category. It's a biblical practice. And God treats that as redemptive. It isn't just ignoring it. I don't know, just whatever. Okay, I'm so sorry, No, I want to cover over in love. I want to absorb what could, to me, be something that is hurtful. And out of compassion, I want to treat her with grace. I want to treat him with grace. We can do that because that's what Jesus is doing for us every day. We love because he first loved us. And we can die to ourselves and bless another person in their weakness. What a wonderful marriage when someone can be weak and maybe even struggle, and that struggle, that mud splashes on us. And we just take it and we say, that's no problem. I'm here. I ain't going anywhere. There'll be times we need to correct. We've talked about that. There'll be times where we are not good enough to be able to forbear, and we get involved in it. We need to restore a relationship. But in the Christian arsenal is this wonderful thing called forbearance. I just don't need to respond in kind. I can take it, I can give it to God, and I can respond with mercy. That's my appeal. Let's be merciful people. Let's have merciful marriages. Tonight we're going to talk about forgiveness. But before we ever get to the need for forgiveness, we can simply have mercy on another person who, like us, is a sinner, who, like us, needs the grace of God, who, like us, stumbles a good bit. But that power of forbearance can create, and let's just say this without going too much into it. Forbearance is not, it takes the sting out of what's being said, but it doesn't necessarily ignore the issue. It might be I need to come back and say, you know what, the last couple of times I've come in and I feel like you've kind of, and Jill's done this with me really helpfully, I feel like you've been harsh with me or with your words. And I just feel like that's something that maybe you're just getting comfortable with that. What's happened? She's forbearing with me because I'm under stress and pressure and things at work, and she's recognized it's not a great time to bring it up. She's forbearing, she's releasing. I don't ever feel that she's judging me. But then at some point she says, honey, I've noticed a pattern in your life, and she brings a correction. But it's out of a forbearing spirit, not out of an exasperated spirit. So forbearance is a gift of grace to be deployed when we want to protect the other person from the implications of their own sinful tendency. And we want to take on something. We want to bear their burden, as Paul says in Galatians 6, and so fulfill the law of Christ. That's what we're doing. So we've covered in this session, we can have disagreement and not have conflict. When we have conflict, it's our own inflamed desires. We go to war. There are tactics in our warfare that we use that either keep conflict going or make it repetitive. But we don't ever necessarily need to even get into those tactics, because God can help us forbear with one another until we can bring the correction and that God wants us to bring to help the person. So tonight, we're going to say, okay, now you're in a conflict. What do I do? How do we get out of this? Where does God want us to go? That's the purpose tonight. So if you don't have conflicts, you don't have to come tonight. Just enjoy the evening. And if you really have no conflicts in your life, I'll pay for your dinner. So, great. Thanks.
All right, that was, I don't know about you, that was very helpful. Just a lot of good reminders in there as well. And if you didn't write this down on your paper, I would encourage you can have disagreement without conflict. Disagreement does not have to lead to conflict. And one of the ways to do that is to develop good listening skills with your spouse. And he talked early on, he said, hearing me, some of us come into with this attitude, hearing me means you agree with me. That's not what a good discussion and listening is about. Listening is about, I want to understand you. I'm not going to, I may or may not agree with you after you present your case and your arguments, but I just want to understand you. Pam and I had a story. I've got a story I remember early on in our marriage that really helped drive this home for me. I was on the phone. It was with one of our pastors at the time. And while I was on the phone, Pam discovered that our refrigerator had stopped working. And she was very concerned about that. She made it known to me. I was on the phone. I was talking with Craig Cabanis, a good friend of mine. And she said, the refrigerator's out. We got to do something about that. And in my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, we'll get to it. Power can be off in a refrigerator if you leave the door closed for 24, 36 hours and nothing spoils. And I'm almost done with this call. Let's wait just 15, 20 more minutes and we'll get to it. But I could tell it was really eating at her that the refrigerator was out. And I couldn't figure out, what's the deal here? What's the problem? And finally I got off the call and we dealt with the refrigerator. I don't remember how we got it going again, and then we had a time to sit down and talk afterwards. Like, why was that so distressing to you that the refrigerator had stopped working and that it was so important that I get off this phone call and we deal with it right now? And it was, in her mind, it was like, well, we've got hundreds of dollars worth of food in the refrigerator and the freezer, and we don't make a lot. We cannot afford to have to replace this. And once I understood what was behind her concern, it made it like, oh, okay, I get that. So next time when I face something like that, I can keep in mind how my wife views the world. Like it really drove home for me. My wife sees things differently than I. It's not wrong, it's just different. So we just need to learn to develop the skill of listening. And you would be amazed at how many conflicts you can keep from becoming arguments if you just learn to develop a skill of listening with the attitude, I want to understand you. And that's done by asking good follow-up questions. As Annie said, repeating, did you say this? Making sure that we understand words and what definitions behind those words. So let's work on developing a skill of listening, and you'll find that you'll be able to minimize a lot of conflicts in your marriage if you do that and you do it well. All right, we've had a lot come at us already this weekend. Gracious speech last night, humble correction, and constructive disagreement. And it was mentioned early on, you're going to get a lot thrown at you this weekend. We still got 2 more sessions to go tonight and tomorrow morning, and lots of stuff. And it can be easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this. Pick 2, maybe 3 at most, things that you want to take away from this conference that you want to work on. And I would encourage you, build a plan for it. I've already got one that I've come away with, and that was from last night's discussion, that I've just got to work on, be more affirming and encouraging. Thank you. Encouraging to Pam. So I've got one of my nuggets that I'm going to go home with, and I'm going to work on a plan to implement it in my life. And if you're sitting here, all of my care group back here, a little heads up, we're going to talk about this at our next meeting in April. So be thinking about it, because I'm going to hold you guys to the fire on that one. But I would encourage you, whether or not, think about, again, when you leave here tomorrow, think about 2 or 3 things that I can take away from this and work on, and then implement those in your marriage. All right, we're going to take a break here in just a minute for our afternoon off. I want to remind you, though, as we do this, we are on a marriage retreat. We're not on a guy's retreat. We're not on a ladies' retreat. This is a marriage retreat. I know a lot of you are staying here with other couples, and that's fantastic. I'd encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities, but don't leave this weekend without spending some time with your spouse talking about some of these questions that we've been given. Don't not lose sight. You've invested a lot of time. You've invested a lot of money. You've invested a lot of things to be here this weekend for a marriage retreat. So let's not lose that with the beautiful day and lots of friends around. So make some time before you leave to begin discussing these questions. There's far more here that you're going to get covered this weekend, but at least to get started on it. All right, we got the afternoon off. You're on your own for lunch. You're on your own for afternoon. It's a beautiful day, maybe a great day for a walk on the beach, a drive up and down the coast. Who knows what you got in store? That's up to you. All right, if you have nothing else to do, Seth could use your help. We're going to be back in here tonight, 5 o'clock for, happy half hour. Starts at 5 o'clock. Dinner will be in this room at 5:30. And what Seth is talking about, we got to get all these these chairs moved out of the way so we can get some tables set up for dinner. So if you can stick around for 10 or 15 minutes and help with that, that'd be great. 7 o'clock, we'll start session 4. Look forward to seeing you all here back this evening. Have a great afternoon. Let me pray for you as you head out. Lord, we thank you for the time we've had here. Lord, how we've been challenged in some ways, how we're being encouraged in others. We pray that we would not leave this weekend without looking to you to speak into our lives and into our marriages. Pray that we would not lose sight of the hope that is in us. The gospel is what brings change. The power of the Holy Spirit is in us. And in Christ, we can have hope that there can be changes in our lives and in our marriages. Pray that you bless our afternoon. Look forward to the remainder of our time together later this evening. In Jesus' name, amen.